All right, welcome back, everyone. We were just talking about all of the first round quarterbacks and some of the guys that can make that leap from maybe the third round, the fourth round to the first round this upcoming year, because there's always a couple that make that big time leap. But let's get into some recruiting updates. There's a ton of stuff going on around recruiting right now, tons of visits going on in the early part of June, as they always do every year, and commitments are rolling in as that happens. So I want to break down all the stuff that has gone on, and it really starts with Ohio State. There is so much going on at Ohio State right now. They are getting tons of recruits, still building on that really incredible number one overall class that they have. And they're not necessarily tapping into wide receiver the way that they have to, but it doesn't necessarily mean that they aren't doing an incredible job. But let's start with one of the big time commitments that they got this past week, which was Fahim Deline, the guy on your screen right there, a four-star safety out of Good Counsel High School in Maryland. This is kind of just what Ohio State's been able to do over the last decade, really, is bring in really high level DBs that can play right away. And this is another guy that absolutely will have a ton to say about next year. I think when you talk about the next year in Buckeye football, where you're going to have a lot of guys walking out the door, especially on the defensive side of the ball. You're going to have young guys step up. And I think this is definitely a guy that can absolutely do that. Very, very talented. Tons to like about this kid. And I think he's going to be ready to go essentially right when he steps on campus. So don't necessarily have to worry about this kid getting up to speed. He's going to be more than fine pretty much right away. And then on the wide receiver front, they did more than fine with Quincy Porter. This kid is absolutely incredible. Obviously, that big time, long, lengthy receiver that they absolutely need. Coming from Bergen Catholic, who is a very, very high level football program in New Jersey. So the kid's played high level games. There's no two ways about that. This is just Brian Hartline doing what he does. He's going to bring in high level wide receivers, even in a year where it doesn't seem like they're gearing up to get any of the, top five or, big time guys in this class. They're still going to get good players. There's no two ways about that. And Quincy Porter might be at the very top of that list because this guy can absolutely play. Very excited to see what he can do. And they also added Isaiah West, who is a three-star running back from Philly. Very talented kid. He adds to the Bo Jackson commitment that they had earlier on as the running backs in this class, and that's likely where it'll end for Ohio State. So Ohio State's on absolute fire, just tearing up everyone, but not necessarily everything is going Ohio State's direction. In fact, they lost someone to their big-time rival in Michigan. They lost a couple of commitments, but also lost one of the big time players in the recruiting world. Aaron Dunston, who is an absolute superstar in the world of recruiting over there at Ohio State, has decided to leave. She is taking the director of operations job over in Ann Arbor. So that's the second staff member that has left Ohio State in the last couple of months, with Tony Alford being the first. So it's going to be really interesting. That is a very interesting talking point. There were some rumors that came out around that I don't necessarily want to get into because I don't necessarily believe them all too much, but that's beside the point. We can maybe get into those if there's a little bit more reality to them down the road. But they also got a big time commitment. They got Jasper Parker, who is a very talented running back to commit, but also the guy on your screen, the four-star safety Kanoa Winston, a very, very talented kid, the highest rated player in their class right now. So obviously a big time pickup for Michigan, kind of moving into that new era of Michigan recruiting where they're going to be a little bit more aggressive. They're going to get the big time guys. They're going to play a little bit more of the new age game than Jim Harbaugh was. At least that's kind of the way that I'm unrolling this as it kind of unfolds in Ann Arbor, over the next couple of weeks. So it'll be interesting to see them kind of get rolling. I feel like they're starting to kind of really get their feet under them and really start recruiting at a very high level. So very excited to see what Michigan can do. But let's get into some other commitments because there were a ton across the last week to weekend. And the biggest one to me is Kyoto Armstrong, a very, very talented tight end, one of the top tight ends in the country, has committed to Texas A&M. Absolutely a huge pickup for this team. This guy moves like a wide receiver, but is tight end size. It's just ridiculous what this kid can do on the football field, and they were battling a lot of teams for him. I know Texas was very much in on this conversation down the stretch, but A&M was able to lock him down. Absolutely huge pickup for Mike Elko. Definitely something that they need going into the new era of A&M football, where you're going to need those big-time physical receivers that they've kind of lacked in the past. They've had a couple of guys that have popped up here and there, but not necessarily, the domination guy that can absolutely go up and get essentially any 50-50 ball you throw up to him. So I think this could absolutely be that guy, a very, very talented kid. But also on the wide receiver front, the Wisconsin Wisconsin got a huge time win, added T.Y. Hilton's son, Eugene, to their roster, a very, very talented kid. I believe a 4-star, who held offers from guys like Michigan and Georgia. So plenty. Oh my goodness. Plenty of teams that were in on this kid, but he decided to go to Wisconsin. A huge pickup for Luke Fickell and company. They need more big time players at that wide receiver position if they want to compete going forward. So Eugene Hilton is absolutely that guy. Very excited to see what he can do. Another big-time wide receiver that came off the board is Talon Taylor, a very talented wide receiver that committed to Georgia this past week, I believe, earlier this week. And this guy's an absolute speedster. His father was a running back in the NFL for quite some time, was also an assistant coach at Louisville back in 2006, excuse me. So very, very talented kid. Dude can do a ton of things on the football field, whether it's return punts, be kind of that gadget guy that you need on the outside, play a little bit slot, play a little bit outside. He can do a lot of different things. So very excited about this kid. They also got a crystal ball from C.J. Wiley, one of the top wide receivers in the entire country. He's set to commit on the 25th, so definitely keep your eye out on that. I would lean Georgia right now, but LSU's very much in on that conversation, as well as a couple other schools that are pushing really hard for that kid because, man, can he play. If Georgia can lock those guys down, I think it would be one of the best wide receiver classes they've had in quite some time, and they're there in Athens. So very excited about this group. I think those two guys in particular could totally flip around Georgia recruiting this upcoming year. And then you got USC picked up a big-time commitment from Hayden Lowe. They just continue to press the right buttons at USC when we talk about defensive recruiting. They continue to get really talented guys that, frankly, they wouldn't even be in the conversation for even a year ago. So they've just been doing incredible things. D'Anton Lynn coming in is absolutely huge for this team. Did a ton of big-time things for them. They also have Justice Terry and Isaiah Gibson committed, although there are tons of teams pushing for those two guys. I think Georgia is kind of at the front of that list there, where you got to kind of worry about them, that's for sure. Definitely going to be a team to watch over the next little bit is Georgia. I think they're kind of picking up steam in the recruiting world, but also Auburn is after one of the big-time USC recruits, Julian Lewis, I think the best quarterback in the country. I could be wrong about, oh no, Bryce Underwood is, but one of the top quarterbacks in the country, visited Auburn this past weekend, and they made quite the impression. I think they definitely are going to have plenty to say about that recruitment going forward. Very excited about that one. It's going to be really, really interesting to watch that unfold. And then you had Auburn get a big-time commitment. You had Eric Winters go to Auburn, which was absolutely huge for them, one of the top safeties in the country. But the guy on your screen is actually committed to Texas. Caleb Chester out of Missouri City, Texas, was a very, very talented guy, a guy that is only a 3-star, but when you start evaluating some of these corners, there's some guys that just kind of go under the radar, and I think this might be one of them. A very talented, very lengthy corner that can play a ton of different places, so very much like that kid. And Texas is kind of heating up as well. I think Georgia and Texas are the teams to watch over the next probably month or so that I think could bring in a ton of big-time players. In fact, one of the biggest players that Texas is after right now is DeCorian Moore. He was on campus this past week. He's the number 1 wide receiver in the country, a former LSU commit, and Texas made a big-time impression. He had his entire family there with him, taking pictures, doing the whole nine, and apparently he had a great time. So that's definitely the leader in the clubhouse right now, but Ohio State's still pushing very aggressively. Oregon is probably the other team to really watch in this one, and then LSU is still kind of trying to get in on that conversation. So it'll be really interesting to see what happens. I think Texas is a team that is really going to have a lot to say over the next month in recruiting, because it feels like a lot of things are just slowly leaning that direction in some big-time recruitments around the country. So very, very excited about this next month. I think there's going to be a ton of stuff going on, but in my opinion, one of the biggest things that goes on in the next month or so is the Elite 11 Finals. It's coming up very, very shortly, I believe at the end of the month here, and the group is just incredible. There's tons of guys that can do a ton of different things. You know, you have Julian Lewis, who's just an incredible quarterback out of Carrollton, Georgia. Matt Zollers, I saw throw about 80 yards yesterday in the air, just an absolute cannon on that kid. A ton of really, really talented guy. Bryce Underwood is obviously going to be the show that everyone comes to watch, because he's just been, the top guy for quite some time and has been committed to LSU for quite some time and feels very happy with that decision. So I think it's going to be really interesting to see all of that unfold over the next couple of weeks. I think there's going to be a lot happening. I would keep my eye on UGA in Texas, as I said earlier, but also USC. Can they hold off UGA in some of these arguments? Is everyone just fighting for second behind the Ohio State Buckeyes? Is probably something that's happening, frankly. But there's going to be tons of stuff to watch, a ton of different things that are going to be happening over the next little bit. Maybe some decommitments, maybe some flips, maybe just some big time commitments that come through the pipe. So it'll be really interesting to watch all of that unfold. But we'll take our final break here. And when we come back, we're going to get into Monday questions, something we started last week that will continue on throughout, going up to the season. And we have 3 questions today that I want to break down for you all that I think are going to play into this upcoming year quite a lot. So we'll break down that right after this, so stick with us.